Yeah, let's get started on today's topic, when stakeholders already know what users need. As I mentioned when we first got together here, apparently people found the title of this presentation triggering. I got several messages to this fact. I've never had that happen before. The idea that it triggers people when they realize that there are stakeholders out there. And it's usually because this is followed by the word no when it comes to, should we go do some research? The idea is that if a stakeholder already knows what the users need, why do we need to do research? We only need to do research to find out what users need, and therefore we don't have to go do that. Of course, that's not true, but that is the perception. In my experience, this often happens when the stakeholder is very much focused on delivering a solution as quickly as possible, and they have a perception that research is going to take time. And it's not necessarily a wrong perception, right? Research does take time. And so this is the challenge that we have. If the goal is to push something out as quickly as possible, then the deal is that what we want to make sure of is that it's as good as possible in that amount of time. But if the stakeholders are absolutely convinced that they know, then why do we need to do the research? And there is a certain amount of logic to this. If they know what the users need, why spend the time trying to reinvent that information? But this is a big assumption that they know what the users need. And the part of the problem is that in many organizations, there's no way for them to find out whether that belief is correct or not. And so what we're going to talk about today is how to deal with those stakeholders, how to help them understand that there are times, many times, when research is going to actually provide value. But we also need to deal with the fact that it's not their priority to do things quickly, to get to a solution quickly is not unwarranted. So how do we work within that time frame? And so that's what we're going to talk about here. And the place where I want to start is I want to start with this idea that we can take stakeholders and we can divide them into basically two groups. We can think of stakeholders who basically are of the belief that that they know what users need. So that's one group of folks. And then there's another group of folks who don't believe that they know what users need. And knowing that these people are out there is actually really important, because it's not everybody, right? This is a subset of folks. Now, the folks who believe what users need, they're the ones who are going to be pushing us hard. The folks who don't believe they know what users need, they're the ones who they're going to give us a little bit of leeway when it comes to the research. If we can prove we can do it in a reasonable amount of time, they're going to be pretty excited about making that happen. So that's the two groups. But it turns out that there's two more groups here, which is very much this idea that we can actually tell, right? So there are stakeholders who actually know what users need. And there are stakeholders who don't know what users need. So when we think about this, we can put this in, this nice little matrix here. And the thing about this matrix is that it actually helps us parse out what we should be doing. So the people who believe they know what users need, who actually do know what users need. In other words, when they say users need X, and then we go and we do the research, we find out that, yep, users do need X. These are really ideal people to have on our team because they are, they're going to be incredibly valuable. Sometimes we refer to them as subject matter experts. And they are going to be really helpful when in the future when we need to go. Now that's assuming that no matter what question we're asking, they fall into these, this combined category of knowing, believing that they know, and actually knowing. Now, the people who don't believe they know, but actually do know, these folks are also very valuable, but they sort of are dealing with being a bit of an imposter, right? They don't believe they know something they actually do. And that causes them to have hesitancy. That makes them less valuable than this category. If we can give them the confidence that they actually do understand what's going on, they will become more valuable to us. They will move up into that category of being ideal. Now, the people who don't believe what they know and don't actually know, these folks are lovely too, because if we can get them to be curious, then everything we discover in research becomes new and exciting and wonderful, and they will be big supporters of any sort of research effort. So being able to identify the people who don't believe they know what users need and actually don't know what they need, when they go out and they learn these things, that's fantastic. And they just get very excited about all the stuff. It's this last quadrant here, the upper right quadrant, the people who believe they know what users need, but they don't actually know what users need. These are the folks that are really the most difficult. And it's because they have this strong belief, and they're wrong, that that this becomes a challenging piece of this process, right? That their misplaced belief is where we get frustration, where we get into trouble a little. And so it's that it's this quadrant that I think is triggering the people who got triggered for this presentation, because it is this quadrant here that are the ones who are likely to be pushing back and saying, no, we don't have time for research. And then they go off and make decisions, and the decisions are just wrong. And it's those wrong decisions that are incredibly frustrating. So that's the sort of place that we're focused on. But I want to remind folks about some theory here, which is my Martin Broadwell proposed this theory that though some people know it by Noel Birch, it's a theory on learning, and it has 4 stages. And we've talked about this before. That the first stage are people who basically don't know. Let me try that again. No, there we go. Don't know what they don't know. And this stage is called unconscious incompetence. And in this stage, and everybody starts here, right? If you're learning how a new language, or you're learning how to cook, or you're learning to play a musical instrument, or you're learning what your users need, that when you're learning all of these things, you start, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what good food is versus poor food, and you're just so focused on doing anything that you're happy with that as a result. But that brings us to the sort of second stage, which is the moment when you realize that you don't know what you don't know, and this becomes conscious incompetence. And at this point, you realize somebody says to you, that food you're cooking, it's not very good, or the music you're playing, not very good. This is when people give up, right? This is it. This is when they realize they don't know what they're doing. And there's a bit of shame that is focused in here, and that actually plays into what we need to deal with here, because if our stakeholder has a fair amount of power, shaming them doesn't necessarily get us the outcome we want. So we need to figure out how to navigate a stakeholder so that they don't fall into a shame attack, because that's just gonna become a test of wills. The next stage is conscious competence. And conscious competence is when you know enough to be able to produce a good outcome, but you have to think about it. And so this is really about thinking about every step. And you've seen this when you've learned new things and you have a to-do list, or you have a process or a checklist. You have to go through each thing and you have to make sure you do it right. If you're learning to cook, it's going through and following the recipes. If you're learning to play an instrument, it's going through and using the sheet music and practicing every note until you get the fingering down, and that, all of those types of things. It's very much that sort of deliberate, conscious attempt at learning the thing. And you have to go through these first 2 stages to get to that stage. It doesn't happen on its own. But there's a 4th stage, which is unconscious competence. And this is sort of seen as almost like an innate an innate mastery, but it's not, right? Because you have to go through all these stages to get there. Nobody just sits down at the piano and picks out a great tune and just plays automatically. Even the folks who are the child geniuses at playing the piano had to take piano lessons. They just pick them up really fast. So it really has to do with making it through these four quickly. And so this is the notion of mastery. And so if we think about that in relationship to this diagram here, what we see is that this group, the stakeholders who believe they know but don't actually know, they are the unconscious incompetent group. And the folks who don't believe they know and don't know, they're the conscious incompetent group, right? They realize that they're consciously incompetent. And the group up here that knows and they know, right? These folks are the consciously competent. And interestingly enough, these valuable folks who are a bit of imposters, they're actually unconsciously competent. And the reason this is useful to understand is that the learning theory behind these 4 stages tells us that we can move people from one stage to the next. This stage we refer to as becoming literate. This is literacy. This stage is becoming fluency. And even this stage here is mastery. But what's really important here is that I'm going to posit something that was probably not what you were thinking when we started this session, which is these people who are valuable, they don't believe they know, but they actually do. They'll become more valuable if we bring them up to this quadrant. And these people who are curious, they love learning this stuff. Well, once they learn it, they become more valuable to the team. And sure enough, these more difficult folks, once they actually do learn what users need, they become more valuable. And this actually goes a little bit against the grain of what we've been taught, because we've been taught that you don't know your users, that you never know who your users are. And this is the problem, right? This idea that we can never learn who our users are, we've sort of brought this on ourselves. And if we continue with that message, it's going to, it doesn't ring true for the people who actually do know what our users need. For whatever reason, for however they managed to learn that. Maybe they did the job for a really long time. Maybe they are the user. Maybe, you know, there is a notion of self-design. You design things that you would use yourself. It's how the iPhone 1 was designed. The whole team was designing for themselves. So they already knew what they wanted. And it makes perfect sense that they are the people who are really sort of focused on this idea that the research isn't telling them anything valuable. And so now we're at this point where the deal here isn't that we have to convince these people that they don't know their users. What we have to do is we have to show them that what they do know doesn't match up with the other research that we do. And that helps them start to see the inconsistencies. And so this is the process here, right? Is that we need to focus on getting everybody in the organization into this quadrant. When we talk about making our organization the world's foremost experts in who our users are, what our users need, what the experiences they currently have are, what the experiences we want them to have are, right? That idea of building up expertise in the organization, what that really is focusing on getting everybody into this upper left quadrant. And this is a radical idea for a lot of UX leaders. This idea that we as UX people and we as UX research people are not the experts, should not be the experts. That in fact, we want our stakeholders to know what users need. We want them to know that and be right about it. Because if we can get to that point, that's basically success. It's going to be really hard. In order to get to that point, we're going to have to do a tremendous amount of work. And because there's always new people coming into the organization and there's always new things to learn about our users and their needs, our job will never be done. But that's the goal, right? Is to get the entire organization to know more about our users and to be correct about them. So this is less about a game of who knows and who doesn't, and more about a game of how confident can we be that what we know is actually true. And that's the key to this, is that we want to focus on getting everybody to be the world's foremost experts on our users and what they need. Now, to do that, we need strategies. And we're going to get into this way more next week. All of next week and the week after is about these strategies. So if you're coming to our intensive, you will hear how we make this happen. But the basic pieces of it is sort of a five-prong approach, five-step approach. The first being that what we want to do is we want to shift from solutions to outcomes. And by that, I mean, most teams, when they start by focusing in on the solution, right? We're going to build data export. We have a customer who has told us that they will spend a ton of money. They will give us this giant bag of money if we deliver them data export. Data export, self-explanatory, right? I mean, it's right there in the title. Data export means you export the data. So how hard can this be? And so we know what the solution is. When we have shipped data export functionality, we have succeeded, right? That's the solution focus approach, right? We have succeeded at this when we ship. But if we take an outcome approach, Outcomes are not what we deliver into the world. Those are outputs. Outcomes are the change that happens in the world because we've delivered something. And because we're UX people, we want to focus on what we call a UX outcome, right? So a UX outcome, oftentimes these days when people talk about outcomes, they talk about business outcomes. Business outcomes are, increasing sales or increasing retention, reducing churn, reducing expenses. But that's not a UX outcome. A UX outcome is a change in the world that is better in the UX. And a change in the world that's better in the UX is improving someone's life. So how does delivering data export actually improve someone's life? Right? There's got to be an improvement to somebody's life in order to achieve the outcome. So in order to establish the improvement, we have to know what the baseline is, right? You can only have an improvement on a baseline. And to understand what the baseline is, we've got to know the experience. So somewhere out there, there's a user, a real user, Edna, we're going to call them today, because we always call them Edna here. Edna is someone who needs data export. She's the one who told her manager, who then told the salesperson, who then told the product manager, who then told us that we have to build data export. But in that game of telephone or Chinese whispers or Russian secrets, depending on where you live, that particular game of information being passed from person to person loses value. And one of the things that's lost almost immediately is what the hell the problem was that Edna was having that prevented her, that made her wish she had data export. And we can measure her experience on a scale of extreme frustration to extreme delight. And when we measure her experience from frustration to delight, what we see is that there are delightful bits and there are frustrating bits. And so this observation of Edna's life, and we see where it's frustrating and where it's delightful, and we can see that, sure enough, if she had data export, it would be more delightful than it is the way it is, because what we learn is Edna is currently copying data down on paper and typing it back into a computer, because that's the only way she knows how to get things from one app to another. That's Edna's current experience. And by understanding Edna's current experience, we can then figure out what the outcome is, because we're looking for an improvement in Edna's life. So basically what we're doing is we're asking the question, what would it look like if it was delightful all the way across for Edna? And if it was delightful for all the way across for Edna, then we understand what has to improve for Edna. We have to understand what the solution is. So the outcome becomes this improvement on Edna's life in contrast to the experience she's currently having. So when we go to build data export, we now know what we need to build. But there's one more piece of this, which is we can ask ourselves, why can't Edna get this improvement on her own? What is preventing her from doing this all by herself without our help? And that becomes the problems that will drive our solution. We have to have, in order to produce a solution, we have to have problems. Now, there are solutions that don't have problems. I'd put blockchain in that category. I would put large language model AI in that category. These are things that are solutions that people seem to want, but they don't actually have a problem to solve here. But that's a topic for another day. But we can derive the problems to solve. Data export definitively has problems to solve. So we can derive the problems to solve from Edna's current experience, and not just Edna's experience, but the experience of lots of different users who would really like data export. And then we can use those problems to identify what the solution should be. We build the solution, we build something that exports data. And either Edna gets the improvement in her life or she doesn't. So this is the basic proactive schematic. We're actually looking at doing this. Now, the thing is that sometimes we'll produce a solution and it won't get the improvement. The nice thing about the little model here that I've built is that there's a way to feed that back into the problems to solve, because when we learn that our solution didn't actually get the improvement, we actually learn enough about the problems to try something different. So now we have this nice, easy way to think about, well, how are we going to get our most difficult stakeholders to become our ideal stakeholders? And the issue is that when we're dealing with the most difficult stakeholders, we've done it in this context where all we're talking about is the solution. And they know the solution. It's data export. What is necessary here? What we're not talking about is any of these other externalities. And so we need to pull the camera back so we can see. If we're just homed in, let's just home in on solution, right? If we're just homed in here on the solution, we miss all this other context. And so what we need is to start with all this context. So the first way we do that is we start with outcomes. If we did a great job on whatever this solution is, on data export, how will we improve someone's life? Whose life we're going to improve? We want to improve Edna's life. Okay, do we know Edna? Have we seen Edna? Do we understand Edna's current experience? Do we understand why Edna can't get here? Once we start to move in this direction, it becomes much easier to have a conversation about what we do and don't know. And that makes a huge difference. So that's the first strategy, right? The first strategy is to go from being solution focused to outcome focused. Once we start moving to outcomes, it turns out that it's less likely that our really difficult stakeholders know what the outcome is supposed to be, and know what the problems are, and know what the current experience is. And now we can introduce these ideas to them in a sort of safe and comfortable way. So that's stage one. Second one is research is not a choice. Right? We have created a problem in that we have given up the autonomy to do research because we think we have to ask permission. We do not. We have to consider it as part of the work. And if we need someone to enable the research and they won't enable the research, we find another way to do the research. So we have to create a way to do this. And we will talk in way more depth next week about how you remove the choice that your stakeholders have as to whether you do research or not, because that needs to no longer be a choice. The third strategy is that we involve stakeholders in the planning. That's different than asking their permission. What we want to do is we want to make sure that they are completely bought in that Edna is the right person to be talking to, that Edna's experience is the experience that they think users have. And if they think that we are missing this, right? Whenever you get a question about, statistical significance or the number of users that you've put into your research or anything, it's because we haven't involved them in the planning. So we need to involve them in actually planning out our method of revealing the current experience. So that's our third approach. The fourth one is a little party trick, and I've used it for years and it works great, which is you have stakeholders predict the insights, which is different than asking them what users need, right? You say, we're going out to do this research. Here's what we know about our users. Here's what we know about what we're asking them. Here's everything we know about their environment, their organization. What do you think we're going to see when we ask them about, all the things around data export? Here are the questions we're going to ask them. Here's what we're going to ask to have them show us. What do you think they're going to show us? What do you think we're going to see? What do you think we're going to hear? You actually have them predict the insights that are going to come in. Now, if they are in this quadrant or this quadrant, they're not going to be able to do this accurately. In this quadrant, they think they will, but they'll get it wrong. In this quadrant, they'll go, I don't know. The folks in this quadrant will actually predict it accurately and then be surprised as hell. And the folks in this quadrant are the ones who we really will be incredibly excited about discovering. Those are the ones who are going to get it right. So this is the test. And this is how we learn what's going on. And if we are having them predict insights and then we're involving them in the research, then they will see that their insights were actually not correct when they're in the most difficult quadrant. And as a result, they are going to realize that they've learned something. And the final thing here is, because of the argument about we don't have time to do research, is that you have to push the research ahead of the need. Which means that we actually have to become the experts in who the users are and what the users need before we start working on the solution. We have to know who those users are and what they need, what their current experiences are, and what the experiences we want them to have are, before the work starts on the solution. Because once the work starts on the solution, everything is about pushing the solution out the door. So we need to know upfront most, if not all, of this information. So research can't be done in a current sprint. Research has to be done ahead of the sprint, way ahead of the sprint. And we'll talk about how to do that more next week when we get into continuous research. So this is what we're talking about. This idea that there are a whole boatload of folks who are very much dealing with this reality that they don't actually know, but we've never given them any tools, any ability to really see that their understanding of the users is wrong. So they go through life reinforcing this notion that they are very much the experts on what's going on. And until we open up the research and get it in front of them and let them prove to themselves that there's things in the world they don't know about, they're going to continue to have this mindset. And it's going to continue to be a frustration to everybody involved. So what we need to do is we need to shift to a more proactive, outcome-driven, strategic research capability. And that's what I came to talk to you about. And if you want to know how to make that shift, the way you're going to make that shift is by pretty much growing the research process. And the way that you'll want to grow the research process is by using techniques that are not usability testing, using techniques that are not basic interviews, but instead using more ethnographic and strategic research techniques. Jared here. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing so you'll get more videos like this. If you have any comments, questions, or thoughts, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And hey, consider joining our Leaders of Awesomeness community. It's completely free, home to over 50,000 UX leaders who regularly share questions, ideas, inspiration about their experiences. The link is in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.